You're watching the Urban Debate on Mirror Now, Faye D'Souza. We're talking about the fact that 49 senior IAS and IPS officers have written a letter to the Prime Minister talking about how they are outraged. 49 senior retired officers, including 2 former ambassadors. The contents of this letter would echo some of the sentiment that the country has been feeling over the last week or so. But some of it will make you sit up and take notice. Let me read out some of the things that this letter includes. By giving sustenance to the brutality of one human being against another, in the name of Hindus, we have failed as human beings. It goes on to say, the bestiality and barbarity involved in the rape and murder of the 8-year-old child shows the depths of depravity that we have sunk to as a people. Mr. Prime Minister, we write to you not just to express our collective sense of shame, not just to give voice to our anguish, but to express our rage. In Unnao, in Uttar Pradesh, it is the reliance on the worst kind of patriarchal feudal mafia dons to capture votes on political power that gives persons freedom to rape, murder and extort as a way of asserting their own personal power. The government of Uttar Pradesh acted only when it was compelled to do so by the High Court, and that shows its hypocrisy and its half-heartedness in intent. It goes on to say, in both cases, Mr. Prime Minister, it was your party that was in power. And given your supremacy within the party and the centralized control you and your party exercise, you more than anyone else have to be held responsible for the terrifying state of affairs. It goes on in the similar note, and we'll go through portions of it through the course of the show. But joining me right now on the top of the show is Ms. Meera Borwankar, retired IPS officer, former DGP, Bureau of Police Research and Development, Government of India. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us on Mirror Now. I want to understand the thought process behind penning this letter. 49 very, very senior bureaucrats have signed this letter, addressed directly to the Prime Minister. Why did you feel you needed to write a letter to the Prime Minister at this point?
See, first of all, I'm surprised that why we are being questioned. We felt very strongly. We share the anguish of a citizen in the country. And I'm distressed that we are being questioned. Having worked in government, all of us felt that the buck stopped somewhere. And it's time that we share our anguish with our own Prime Minister.
Yes.
And hold a mirror to him about the ground reality.
Well, I want to, I want you to elaborate on certain points of this letter, ma'am, if you would. It says here that the government of Uttar Pradesh only acted when compelled to do so by the High Court, and this shows its hypocrisy and its half-heartedness in its intent. It also says that the government of Uttar Pradesh has fielded these patriarchal feudal mafia dons to capture votes. Do you believe that this is the history behind this particular case, or is it a pattern in Uttar Pradesh that has resulted in the kind of crime that we have seen happen in the state?
See, I have never worked in UP, but there are some states which are better administered. I was lucky to have worked in Maharashtra, and from a distance I feel, yes, being very feudal, being very patriarchal, being not respectful to the gender, in fact resenting the fact that women and girls have the audacity to ask for equality, seems to be the background of the state. And yes, because of this kind of atmosphere, it has led to this kinds of tragedies too.
Right. The letter also goes on, ma'am, to say that, and you address the Prime Minister directly, saying, given your supremacy within the party and the centralized control that you and your party president, obviously referring to Mr. Amit Shah here, exercise, you more than anyone else have to be held responsible for this terrifying state of affairs. Now, it's arguable that this was possibly law and order at a state level. How is the Prime Minister personally responsible for this? Would you elaborate for our audience, please?
Yeah, I agree with you that the state administration is as much responsible as the center. But we had to find one focus, and there are 49 of us. We debated, we drafted, we redrafted, and the consensus was that in this case, the Prime Minister is the one we should directly talk to.
Right, and I want to go on to read out of this letter. You said, yes, you had, instead of owning up and making repatriations, however, you until yesterday chose to remain silent, breaking your silence only when public outrage, both in India and internationally, reached a point where you could no longer ignore it. Even then, you condemned the act and expressed a sense of shame. You have not condemned the communal pathology behind the act, nor shown any resolve to change it. Do you believe that that the manner in which these crimes have been turned into a communal conversation has, as mentioned in this letter, has hurt the fabric of our country permanently?
Sure. We do see communal pattern in these crimes, and we have very high expectations from our Prime Minister. We feel as a group that he is above all these communal insinuations, communal issues, and you cannot put these under the carpet. So we have come out openly and we have described what we feel, what we see as the reality in the field.
Well, I specifically want to ask you about one sentence where it says, we have had enough of these belated remonstrations and promises to bring justice when the communal cauldron is forever kept boiling by the forces within the Sangh Parivar. Now, the Sangh Parivar being named here quite deliberately, could you tell us why?
I would not like to, it's strange you're asking me to talk about what is very obvious. The undercurrents between the communities, between the vulnerable sections of the society, the way the weak and the downtrodden are being treated. We just have flagged the issue which everyone is aware of, but maybe they are too scared or do not feel strong enough to flag the issue. So I would say that having worked in government, all of us felt that it's high time that at least we come out in open and flag what everyone or most of the citizens in India have been feeling.
Right, you also say that your sense of shame is more acute because some of your younger colleagues right now who are still in service, especially those working in districts and are required by law to take care of and protect the weak, seem to have failed their duty. So do you believe also the bureaucracy or the law and order system has failed at this point?
I would say yes, that we have not stood up to the Constitution. Yes, we very strongly feel, and you can see that some of the officers did get corrupted and did not do a straight, honest investigation. In both the cases, it's very obvious. And when we talk of the Prime Minister, we talk of the head of the institution, and yes, law enforcement agencies, police, also needs to work in alignment with the Constitution and not in alignment with any political party. That we wanted to talk about.
Right. And Ms. Borwankar, there is, among the things that you have asked of the Prime Minister, and you've said that this needs to be done immediately, we're going to put those up on the screen, but there's one thing here that says, in the memory of these innocent children and other victims of hate crime, please renew a pledge to offer special protection to Muslims, Dalits, to members of minority communities, to women and children, so they no longer need to fear their life and liberty, and any threat that will extinguish with full force by any threat will be extinguished with full force by state authority. Do you believe that these groups of people are currently under threat in our country?
Oh yes. If you, it's like if you close your eyes to the reality, only then you would feel that they are not under threat. We definitely feel the way the things are. A vulnerable section, women, children, young girls, minority communities, they are definitely feeling insecure.
Right. And do you believe, ma'am, that it is up to the, or it is within the powers of the Prime Minister at this point to return that sense of security to these people?
Absolutely. And he must take us along. He must take all of us, irrespective of the class, caste, gender. He must take all of us along, and along with the Prime Minister, we also as citizens share the blame, share the apathy, share the pain which our girls and children are going through. So we are all together, and that's why we wrote to the Prime Minister, to our own Prime Minister.
Right. Ms. Borabankar, thank you so much for joining us, and I welcome you to stay for the rest of the conversation, as 3 of your colleagues are part of this conversation as well, and your inputs would be most appreciated. I want to welcome the rest of my guests at this point to this conversation. Remember, viewers, we're talking about the letter that has been written by 49 very, very senior retired bureaucrats who have framed a letter to the Prime Minister. And this letter is available on the internet, but I'm also going to give you excerpts of it through the course of this conversation, something that we have to all acknowledge, because remember, someone who's retired after so many years of service in public life, in the government, knows how the government functions. And for 49 of them to have collectively drafted this letter means that as a country we need to stop and take cognizance of what is in this letter. Joining us on the show, Harsh Mandar is a former IAS officer of the government of Madhya Pradesh. Mr. Amitabh Pandey is a retired IAS officer, former Secretary, Interstate Council, Government of India. Also joining us on the show, Govindraj Etherat, senior journalist and founder of India Spend, who also runs Boom, which is a fact-checker website that will tell us where the facts really are. Vaibhav Agarwal of the BJP will join us as well. Aranya Johar is a young poet who comes in with the citizen voice, with the young citizen voice as to how women are feeling in this country at this point. I'm going to go over to Mr. Amitabh Pandey. Mr. Pandey, thank you for joining us. Like I was just reading out excerpts of this letter when I was having my conversation with Meeraji, I want to ask you about this portion, and this is something that we should be cognizant of. It says, rage over the agenda of division and hate, your division and hate, your party is so basically accusing the party perhaps of fueling rage. Is that something you believe?
Well, is there any doubt that there is an agenda of hate and division which is being spread by the ruling establishment? I mean, to us who have been seeing the situation develop over the last 3 or 4 years, mind you, I voted for Prime Minister Modi when he came into power, so there is no history of animosity or opposition to him. But in the last 4 years, we have seen a remarkably huge deterioration of the communal situation, or the targeting of Muslims, or the targeting of Dalits, and of generally a whole environment of intimidation and fear. And for that, the responsibility rests entirely with the present ruling establishment, including the BJP and its various affiliates. You know, to all of us who read the newspapers, who see the situation on the ground, this is absolutely true. So I don't see why one should have to explain why. I think it should be evident to anyone that there is a pattern, there is a distinct trend of sort of attacking especially the Muslims, and all the all the cow vigilante squads, the beef-related lynchings, the murder of akhlaq. I mean, there is a systematic pattern by which a particular community has been targeted, and we see it's more than evident to anyone. So I'm as surprised as my colleague Meera was that why should we be asked this question? I thought it is evident enough.
Right. I must make it clear, I'm not questioning you, but I do believe that this is something that ought to be highlighted on prime time for national media to our audience, so anyone who hasn't read the letter perhaps should look through it and should understand where they stand with it. Mr. Harsh Mandar, thank you for joining us as well. I want to take you back to the pointers that this group of bureaucrats, yourself included, have asked of the Prime Minister. Reach out to the family and seek their forgiveness on behalf of all of us. How important is that at this point?
I think it's central in its importance because India has never been as divided as it is today since the partition riots. The sense of fear that my colleague spoke about, I travel across the country, the kind of fear that has settled into the hearts and minds of our Muslim brothers and sisters in tribal areas, in the hearts of our Christian brothers and sisters, and in some parts with our Dalit brothers and sisters, is unprecedented. It's comprehensive. There's a sense that I'm not safe anywhere now. Anyone can come into my home and charge me, look at my fridge. I can't travel safely on a train. I have Muslim friends who tell me their mothers say, if I phone, don't answer, salam alaikum, let no one know that you're a Muslim. So there's this, and then the violence. And I've been traveling around with a group of colleagues in what we call the Karwan-e-Mohabbat across the country. We visited 10 states, and I found, in state after state where we visit families affected by hate violence, the kind of brutality with which strangers I just came back from Asansol, where Imam Rashidis, who spoke with such compassion and restraint, but he got his 16-year-old son back with his nails pulled out, not just killed, but killed in a really brutal kind of fashion, his eye gouged out, his body partly burnt. And this is a pattern that I've seen. In Bengal, we found that the boys had been lynched, their genitals had been smashed, in place after place. And this is, Afrazul was, after all, a stranger. He probably met him for the first time 15 seconds earlier. And the way that he was killed and a 14-year-old boy was primed up to, we have to recognize that something has been unleashed in our society. And it is a normalization of hate. It's how it's become so much part of our everyday life. I sometimes think that, it's like in our society, you've been drugged. It's a drug, it's a toxic, heady drug. And we are all moving around in this climate. And the Prime Minister has to take responsibility, because this has mostly happened in these 4 years, this growing vigilante attacks. And forgiveness, I just wanted to say, when we have traveled across the country and visited families affected by lynching, in fact, the first thing that we had resolved that we would say is that we seek forgiveness from you for what you have suffered, for the kind of country that we have not prevented together from becoming so far from our constitutional values and morality. And I think that if the Prime Minister expresses genuine remorse to each family, it would do an enormous amount to heal and there's remorse and then there's justice. These are the two things that we've spoken about.
Right, I want to bring in Govind Raj Aitraj. Govind, as a senior journalist and citizen yourself, I first want your reaction to this letter, which I'm sure you've read. And after that, we'll talk about the statistics that you've put up on your website today. But first, your reaction to the letter to the Prime Minister that was written by these retired bureaucrats.
Yeah, thanks, Faye. So, I mean, I can't react to the letter because it's obviously the opinion and learned opinion of 49 people who are extremely qualified, who've seen life in government and are now outside. And they have a point of view which I have nothing to add to or contribute to. But let me take a step back. I think one of the reasons you called me here was to talk about the rape cases, and which presumably is one of the triggers for this letter, and yes, the government's perceived inaction, or the Prime Minister's perceived inaction. So I just wanted to point out that we have to be very, very careful when building narratives here. And I know that we are all very upset about what happened in UP and in Kashmir, but let me take you a couple of years ago, and I want to quote from our India Spend articles. 2014, there were a spate of child sexual abuse cases in Bangalore. 6-year-old girl was raped by her 37-year-old teacher. A 4-year-old girl was sexually assaulted by unidentified persons. An 8-year-old girl was raped by her 63-year-old teacher in Bangalore, right? 22-year-old photojournalist in Shakti Mills, not very far from where your office is, was raped in 2013 and by 5 people. It was found out that 3 of them had raped another lady or a girl in July 2013, just 2 months before that. All of them were arrested within 72 hours of the second rape happening. As we've also pointed out, 4 of 10 victims are children. 13% of those are age 11 and below. But also remember that in almost 98% of cases, the perpetrator is known to the victim. Now, this is not unique to India. This happens all over the world. If you go back further and look at the Nirbhaya case, the big narrative that was created then was that Delhi is the rape capital of India. At least if you go by the reported cases as of that year, or even in 1 or 2 subsequent years, it was not Delhi which was the rape capital in crime rate. It was actually a city like Bhopal. And there were many small cities of India or towns which were actually in the top 10 and not Delhi. The reporting of cases, including of children, has gone up sharply thanks to the bringing in of POSCO, and that's changed the data somewhat. But the important thing is the narrative. What is the narrative that we are trying to build here? I would argue that I cannot see any clear trend in terms of where the rapes are happening, how they are happening, and what conditions they are happening, except to say that there are some very sick people out there, very sick males out there, and there are some very unaware and perhaps helpless victims out there, and they're all over the country. And I think we have to build the right narrative, because only if you have the right narrative will you have the right policy response. We said in Delhi after Nirbhaya that we need to police our stations better, we need to have better patrolling, more women police stations. That's fine. But there is a fundamental social problem. In most cases, if the victim is known to the perpetrator, then we've got to fix the social problem as well, in addition to creating better policing and so on. So I'm just worried when I look at the frenzy that we worked ourselves into in the case of Unnao and Kathua, that we are losing sight of the narrative. There is a different narrative to do with the communal part of it, the protest marches that were held. I'm not getting into that. I'm just saying that as journalists, as people who or academicians, we should look at the data carefully, form careful narratives, and therefore address the problem which is at the core of it, which is that there are some very sick human beings in this country and perhaps in other parts of the world too, and we should find a way of capturing or trying to prevent these things from before they happen.
Right. We will have, of course, Vaibhav Agarwal join us. Vaibhav Agarwal has joined us right now. Vaibhav, if you can hear us, Vaibhav, Meera Borwankar, who's a retired IPS officer, one of the 47 bureaucrats who penned that letter to the Prime Minister, Harsh Mandar and Amita Pandey are on the show with us right now. We're talking about this letter and their motive, behind addressing the Prime Minister directly. All 3 of them said, we're surprised we're being questioned. It seemed fairly obvious. Vaibhav, what is your response to the fact that in this letter it says very clearly that reactions only came after the outrage, that the UP government's reaction was only after the High Court, forced it to react, that minorities, Dalits and women are unsafe in this country right now, and that feeling of security needs to be promised and returned back to them?
Faye, thanks for bringing me on to this. And I'm very surprised at the senior officers. I'm a son of a bureaucrat myself. And my dad seems to be very happy and very reasonable in seeing what Modi ji is trying to do and what is the state government's role and the center government's role. And they're bureaucrats. They should be able to distinguish clearly between what Narendra Modi has to do as a prime minister and what the state governments in their own functions have to do. Unfortunately, the letter, I've read that, and it is absolutely in good taste. However, I definitely have to bring this up that there's a lot of dissatisfaction that they are showing from the Modi government, because perhaps the Modi government has not given them a reappointment in some cadre, and a Modi government has not given them a big bungalow to live in. And a Modi government is not, and this is my one point. And I welcome the letter, and I'm not denouncing that letter. I definitely welcome that. But my second point being that, I saw the list of signatories someone is a chief secretary, someone is an additional chief secretary. I mean, do we even acknowledge how senior that level is? May I ask them as a young one, before being a politician, and I'll tell you, I held a citizenship of a foreign nation which could have given me much better infrastructure 10 years back.
I don't understand your point.
To service the country. And I want to ask, and I'm under 50, and I want to ask, what in their each of their respective roles, if I was to audit it, what in their each respective roles did they ever do to contribute to the nation except live in big bungalows and ride in
Really, Vaibhav Agarwal, there is a letter that has been penned right now, and instead of responding point by point to the issues that have been raised in the letter, you are going to point fingers at the 49 bureaucrats who wrote it. And as the son of a bureaucrat yourself, you are going to ask what service they have done to the nation? Isn't that unfair? Why don't you respond to what is in the letter instead of casting aspersions on the people who wrote it? Why is it that everyone who asks you a question, for some reason, ought to have some sort of, ulterior motive to ask you a question? Asking you questions, as the government, you should simply answer those questions. Now, for someone who spent their entire life in what is known as public service, is it fair to ask them what they have done in public service?
I want to know that they are bringing out social evils in Modi ji's government using as strong words as shame. I want to understand, they were public servants, Janta ke Naukar. What did they do in their respective tenures to win the heart of the people and fix that public disorder? Why can't I ask that as a junior most person here? I'm under 40. And I'm talking to
Vaibhav Agarwal. All right, fair enough. I will take your question to the IS officers who are with us, but I also want to correct you on one. You are not the junior most person here. I myself am younger than you. And Aranya Johar here, who just finished answering an exam in what, 12th standard, 11th standard, first year? Okay, is in college, and she's going to ask you a question. And as the junior most person on the panel, you will then be bound to answer her question. But first, any of the three retired bureaucrats on the panel who want to take Vaibhav Agarwal's question and answer it, I'm not going to force you to do so, but if you want to answer it, please go ahead. Harsh doesn't want to answer it.
I mean, beyond pointing out the ridiculousness of the question, I mean, I really cannot respond to this kind of rubbish.
All right, Ms. Borwankar? One second. Vaibhav.
I think I'm not answerable here for my record of service.
Yes. Ms. Borwankar will speak now. Meera Borwankar, please, go ahead.
Of course, I agree with Harsh that we are not answerable about what we felt and we put it in writing. But I would like to share my experience that when I supervised investigation of a rape case of an 8-year-old child in Kolhapur, we could secure a conviction of the accused because the case was registered immediately. There was no pressure. It was a totally professional investigation by the officers of Kolhapur police. In another case, where registration was late, witnesses were tampered with, we could secure conviction only in the session court, and the accused got scot-free later on in the High Court because of the lapse of time. So in rape cases, registration, professional investigation is very important. Flag this issue. And point number 2, we are not, at least personally, I am not in favor of women police stations. We should have more women in each police station so that a woman in distress can approach the nearest police station and seek professional help and justice instead of being directed towards a women police station which may be 15 or 30 kilometers away.
Right. Now, Aranya Johar, as the youngest person on the panel, please feel free to ask a question.
My question is, why did it take outrage to have our Prime Minister that we've put at his position to make a statement about this? Until he made a statement, his silence was his statement. I want to know, why did it take these many rape cases, death of women and death of minorities to cause and to ask the Prime Minister to give a statement?
Vaibhav Agarwal, go ahead.
It's excellent question, and I really, really love it. I was with young girls like you, and I was absolutely, and I spent 15 minutes yesterday with them. Just walked up to me just after the protest at Jantar Mantar, and they asked the same question. And you know what I replied? I'll tell you. The Prime Minister makes a statement because there is a political outrage to the matters. We have to understand that the Prime Minister is not able to make a distinction between a rape that is being committed in Bangalore, or in Assam, or in West Bengal, or in Unnao and Kathua. We are not able to make a distinction as a government. And because the outrage is only versus the two incidents, and I'm talking about these rape cases only in a span of less than 2 months. So my Prime Minister comes out and make a statement for the country that we will not let anyone who's guilty get away with the crime like this. But we also understand that these are heinous crimes and happen because of a larger social evil. There is a government at the center, and there are special local laws that work in the states respectively in their jurisdictions. The government has already gone ahead and amended and made some new laws, in totality about 32 of them. If we have time on Faye's show, I can definitely share the list, or if you can write me an email, I'll be happy to put this in public. But this government is committed to providing safety and security and welfare to women and children, specifically. Right. You know, so we're doing a lot of stuff, but then my Prime Minister...
All right, Vaibhav Agarwal, let me first correct you on one point. He's not your Prime Minister, he's our Prime Minister. He's Prime Minister of the entire country. That's my first point. Secondly, to react to what you said about this rape and this case and that case and this, I think what you were insinuating was this religion and that religion. Let me read out from the letter that has been written by these retired bureaucrats in Kathua. No, listen.
I only want to bring that out, the selective nature of the protest and the outcry.
Why do you think it's selective?
Because when Nirbhaya happened, I mean, where was Congress's candle march? For goodness sake, when 2 rapes happened last month in Kolkata, what did Mamata Banerjee do on record? She went ahead and closed the cases. When rape cases happened in Assam, our government actually booked the culprits. When rape case was unearthed in Rohtak, there's an investigation that is happening. When a rape case is unearthed in Surat, there's a strong investigation that is happening, and we're committed to it.
Faye,
when a rape case goes south from an investigation perspective, and that is not in totality, you know, each agency of the state government.
Yes, go ahead.
It's instinctive in nature. When it went south, we got in the CBI, and this is exactly what we want to do in the Unnao, in the Kathua case as well. We want to bring in the CBI.
Go ahead. Govind Dathraj will speak now. Govind, go ahead.
Yeah, Faye, I think, we've just, at this point, we've descended into the politicization of the debate. I mean, I think I would request my friend from the BJP to go back. You know, I think we all agree that this is not a problem that's confined to a community, either as a perpetrator or as a victim, because the data just doesn't say that. It's not confined to a geography, it's not confined to a city, it's not confined to a state. This is a national problem, and we should address it as a national problem. By constantly diverting the debate into that of communities and why someone in West Bengal didn't pipe up, or why someone in Maharashtra didn't pipe up. I mean, I think it's being unfair, and it's an insult to the people who've been victims or who've suffered at the hands of these perpetrators, who should be brought to justice or are being brought to justice. I think if we were to focus on what the solutions are, we need to completely put aside what the location or the geography or the community
religion
of the perpetrator or the victim, and that's the only point we will start finding solutions. Otherwise, we are going to keep going round and round.
But if I may say something, I think it would be irresponsible to alienate the identity of the girl from the cause of the rape. We have to look at why this whole thing happened. Why was the rape used as a political power over minorities and over certain religions? We cannot refuse that it was communal. We cannot refuse that it was aimed to a certain community and a religion.
Right. Let me bring in Harshman, former IAS officer, government.
That's true. But the thing is, but there are.
Can I come in, please?
Yes, Harsh,
Can I
go
just
ahead,
come
and
in,
Govind,
please?
I'll come back to you. Harsh,
To
yes.
both Vaibhav and Govind.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I also wanted to respond. See, Vaibhav, just generally I wanted to say that please, for you to casually challenge the record of public service of 49 men and women whom you don't even know reflects a kind of arrogance that I found so stunning that I didn't even have words to respond. But that's a very minor point. Even if we were all absolutely third-rate people, if we had raised important questions before the nation, they're worth and worthy of being answered. But to both Govind and Weber, and what the young woman said, I thought she made the most profound statement in the discussion so far. Because what has caused us outrage is not simply the brutal rape of a child or of this 14-year-old, 17-year-old minor. What the outrage is that these were both hate crimes. They were crimes that were motivated by the religious identity of the child and the caste identity of the minor woman. And the outrage actually burst out into the country when two ministers carried the national flag to defend the accused in those two in the rape of that child. When lawyers associations hadn't somebody who was trying to defend, who was trying to fight the case on behalf of the victims. So it is when the father of somebody whose daughter has been raped is killed in custody because he's trying to seek justice. It is this that has caused the anger and the outrage. It is not, and therefore even for Govind, I feel that you're missing the point. We are missing the point because the outrage is not simply about child sexual abuse, which is an enormous problem in this country, and that goes across different governments, different eras, different regions. The outrage is about the communal character of both the crime and the defense by people in the political establishment.
Right, we have a couple of people on the phone line
please,
now.
So I'm
Yes,
not
okay,
disagreeing
Govind,
with you.
Govind,
I
yes.
actually started out by saying precisely that. No, one second. So I actually, Harsh, I started out by saying precisely that the reason you've written this letter and the 49 people have written this letter, I cannot hold it against you. I think it's a valid point of view and you're entitled to it because you've seen things, you've used your experience and you've contrasted maybe the previous occasions and the present and presented a point of view. The thing is, I totally agree that this particular case is along the lines of what you said, and that's never been my quarrel. My quarrel is the larger narrative that we're building around rape. And my concern is that when we look at past cases, including Nirbhaya, there was a lot of outrage, again for different reasons, but there was no communal angle there was no other angle, there was no caste angle, but it was outrage because of the way a young girl was brutalized. Similarly, there have been many other rape cases, like I pointed out, in Bangalore, in Bhopal, in Delhi, and each of them is unique in its own way. Some may result in outrage, some may not result in outrage, but all I'm saying is that as citizens of this country, if we need to solve the fundamental problem, which is that of sick people
I agree with
and
what
sick
you're
males
saying, Govind.
particularly, then we need to do something about it and focus at least some of our energies on that.
Right, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that according to the letter at least, and according to what Harsh Mandar was saying, it was the people who began, the Bar Association that began the protest in Kathua that brought in religion. It was not, no outrage was religion focused until then. And I think that the backlash that protest received was because religion had been brought in. And let me read out of this letter. It says, in Kathua, the culture of majoritarian belligerence and aggression promoted by the Sangh Parivar, which emboldened the rabid communal elements to pursue their perverse agenda. They knew that their behavior would be endorsed by the politically powerful, those who have made their careers by polarizing Hindus and Muslims across the sectarian divide. And that's a fairly bold statement to have been made. Mr. Amitabh Pandey, you've not minced words there.
Yeah, I just want to supplement what Harsh said. You see, the difference here is that we are not talking of rape as a generalized crime. And this is a classic kind of trivialization strategy by which you first start focusing on the act itself, on the sexual nature of the act, and then try and see what the solutions are, treat it as a law and order subject, and therefore it becomes a part of the responsibility of the state government and so on. What we are focusing on was an example of rape as an instrument of hate. It was not rape per se. I mean, that is bad enough, but this was rape as an instrument of hate. There was a specific targeting of a Muslim Bakarwal. There was an association, there was a design of trying to remove the Bakarwal community from the forest lands to which they have had traditional grazing rights. That is a part of the agenda, and it is that part of the agenda which is a part of the issue of governance. And that is why we are writing to the Prime Minister, not because of a crime was committed. Crimes of this kind are committed in hundreds of places, and obviously one does not necessarily react to all those in the same way. It is because this was an example where it was a hate crime. It was not just a sexual crime. And similarly, in the case of Unnao, it was an abuse of power. It was an abuse of power by a MLA belonging to the ruling party. And that is what angers us.
I disagree.
It is not the act of rape. I mean, that is bad enough. It is because it has been, the accused is a wielder of political power in the UP situation. And these are the two examples where it relates to the larger issues of the kind of governance that we have under in the last 4 years. And that is where we feel that there has been such a decline in the values of the enshrined in the Constitution, the values of liberality, of tolerance, and that is why we were so angry. So
Right.
the reason for this is not because of the act of rape, which is, I'm not qualified here to discuss the nature of the crime. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not associated with that. It's the governance part of it which really angers us so much.
Well, Suresh Kapoor is on the phone line from Mumbai. He's been holding for a while. Suresh Kapoor, go ahead.
Yeah, ma'am, I would like to ask a question to Mr. Weber Agarwal.
Yes.
Will all the arrogance at his command, he is asking the all senior retired officers that what contributions you have made. I would like to tell him that we in the bureaucracy, right from a clerk to an officer, we work within the framework of the rules, regulations. Politicians are also public servants. We are also public servants. We have code of conduct.
Right.
We have conduct rules.
Right.
We have CCS classification rules.
Right.
Any act of disobedience,
Yes.
we have penalties.
Yes. And your point is, Mr. Kapoor?
My point is that they should frame some conduct rules for the politicians. They have wasted a lot of money on the people. If one person does a misdemeanor in the government service, he is charge sheeted.
Okay.
Then politicians, you can't do anything with them.
Right. So why aren't there similar rules for politicians? Prabhakar on the phone line from Mumbai. Prabhakar, go ahead.
Good evening.
Yes.
Actually, I am here to support the contents of the letter written by all senior bureaucrats.
Okay.
The reason being, I have strong objections to the BJP spokesperson who has objected to the expressions of the mentioned in the letter, because I think they are trying to politicize the issue. Actually, what is expected from the government, especially the Prime Minister or the people who claim to be stalwarts of the BJP, is to understand the feelings of all these bureaucrats behind this letter. They are all senior people. They have retired from their services.
Okay.
They should be treated as elders in the family, and we do not ignore the advice of the elders. We should actually think over the advice instead of commenting on that. Let us not try
this
to
is very
politicize
funny.
each
This is
and everything. This is
that's
my-
what the point
this is my
about.
opinion.
They are the people who are responsible for implementation of all government policies. What is the government? Government is all about bureaucracy. The politicians don't even man the government. The government is in totality manned by the bureaucracy.
No,
the
hang
red
on.
tape, as we call it.
Hang on.
That's the whole idea. What has the bureaucracy done to implement the countrywide policies?
One second.
That's exactly what I'm questioning.
Vaibhav Agarwal,
You can shoot me all you want.
Indian citizens or citizens of any democracy vote in a government. We don't vote in the bureaucracy. And it is, at the end of the day, every single bureaucrat reports to a ministry that reports to a minister. Is that not true? How can you turn around today and wash your hands of the entire situation, saying we have absolutely nothing to do with it, it's entirely the bureaucracy? Why do we have politicians at all? Why do we vote in a government? Let's not vote in a government.
I'm not washing away my hands.
Yes, it sounds
that's
like you are.
That's the wrong part of it, Faye, and that's when I say that's when I say that my government is being maligned because of such letters, and I'll tell you why. We are not trying to wash our hands away from the situation. In fact, this is the first time the political class is forced to take questions like these, because in no history before, and you've been a journalist, no politician has answered to such queries so extensively. You know, The Wire has published the article with Modi ji and the RSS in the background. What is this? This is nothing but politicization. And also understand, and let's draw a line between public servants and public representatives. Public elects the representatives and sends them to the government to head that, to get the work done from public servants, because otherwise public servants don't want to do the work perhaps. And that's where the distinction is. Don't get BJP, Congress and anything else in between. That's the constitution. And we can have another debate on that. Let's have a debate on code of conduct and so on and so forth. The politicians have their set of code of conduct. But the end of the day, the implementation arm is the red tape, is the bureaucracy. Is not the Jan Pratinidhi. The Jan Pratinidhi reaches the voice of the people to the bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is responsible for implementation of
So you're
policies.
saying that this government has not managed to get any action out of the bureaucracy. Is that what you're saying? Govind, go ahead. Govind Raj Etraj, go ahead, please.
This is the first time.
I had a question for Vaibhav.
That's the displacement.
Govind, please go ahead.
I'm not understanding. So if the former bureaucrats have written in letters saying that, should they not have written the letter? Are they not allowed to express their opinion? And if they've expressed their opinion, so what's wrong?
Govind, I'll tell you what. That is exactly what my opening speech was. I want them to express it and I welcome it. But the problem is the tenor in which the narrative is being created for Kathua and Unnao. Exactly what I'm saying is that 2 rapes and 3 rapes and 4 rapes and 5 rapes cannot be distinctively different. They are rapes. That's it. The buck stops it.
Yes, right.
So why do you point out in your letter?
Let me point out, in a free country.
Why do you point out in your letter Kathua and Unnao? Why not anyone else? Hey, let's not make a joke of freedom of speech here. And Supreme Court has come out on record to say that we have freedom of speech, but it is with reasonable restrictions. You don't want me to quote it. Now we can discuss the overreaching and overarching judiciary on democracy also.
This letter has provided more solutions than our government has, and these solutions are not pertaining to only those 2 cases. Those solutions are pertaining to any rape case to come post, any kind of hate crime to come post.
What is the solution?
So even though it has been triggered by these 2 cases, it is providing solutions to more.
What is the solution? Tell me.
Well, Vaibhav Agarwal, if you're going to ask that question, it's obvious you have not read the letter.
I don't know how to
So I'm going to give you a few minutes to read the letter. Going to page 2.
I have. Right.
You haven't. Read it again. Major Bairam on the phone line from Pune. Major Bairam, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I have only one person to point out that, and this Mr. Vaibhav Agarwal. I wish he would just keep quiet a little. Learn to listen, Mr. Vaibhav. I put myself in the category of all these 49 retired people. I am also 75 years old. I am with them. I am ex-army. I am totally with them with what they say, Mr. Harsh Mandan and Miss Gowarikar. Very well put up letter. My sentiments are the same. Mr. Vaibhav, please be humble. You're sitting with eminent people. You start off by saying you live in houses. Where the hell do you live? You live in a jhopdi?
Right. Greg on the phone line from Goa. Greg, go ahead. Let me take the calls. Greg, go ahead.
Access to the taxpayers' money.
Can I speak, Faye?
Yes, Greg, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, Faye. Hi, Faye.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, I'm Greg DeMonte calling from Goa. I'll just make three, four quick points.
Yes.
I've been watching this program and I've shifted from other programs and come into your programs. Firstly, congratulations to you and your team, doing a very good job.
Thank you.
Actually, we should stop calling the politicians on the program. I'll tell you why. And Vaibhav, I hope, is listening. They are just going to pass the buck. Congress did this, I did this, you did this. They're not going to take responsibility. And the arrogance.
No, Greg, do you have specifically a point to make with regard to the topic that we're talking about? Don't make personal comments on any member of the panel, but is there a point you want to make about the topic we're discussing?
Final point. It is high time that the police take action.
Against him.
The police should come forward and take action. Like Vaibhav himself rightly said, what is the bureaucrats doing? Let them take action. Why are they shying away from the responsibility of taking...
That's correct.
Right. I'll tell you, in this particular case, why what Greg is saying is relevant. Absolutely. Is because in the Kathua case, at least we know that the investigative team that was looking into this particular crime was changed thrice. 3 times over, they changed the people who were investigating that particular crime. And I'm going to go back to Mr. Harsh Mandar because, Harsh, I know you wanted to say something. And I think, Vaibhav, I'm also getting messages from viewers who say that at some point, feedback and criticism is something that you should be willing as an organization or as a government should be willing to listen to. Harsh Mandar, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I just he wanted to say what can we do? We can do, what do we expect from the government? We expect the government to first ensure that this rising legitimacy of hate all across, hate speech, hate violence that we're seeing grow like an epidemic. And this is again, whoever might say, I'm just sort of drawing this out. India Spend, which is being represented here, did a study of hate crimes related to the cow from 2010 onwards. And they found that 97% of them have happened after Mr. Modi came to power. 97%. 84% of people killed in cow violence in India are Muslim, and 8% are Dalit. And in the travels, I visited 10 states, visiting families affected by lynching and hate violence. And almost without fail, the police, far from taking action against the cow vigilantes, has registered criminal cases against the victims. I just went to Pehlu Khan, it's 1 year, I went back to his family, and his entire family is now running around trying to protect themselves from anticipatory bail against them, rather than seeing any kind of justice happen. So that is what we are saying. We want the constitutional morality to prevail. We want the Prime Minister to be defending that constitutional morality and to give that message to all the BJP governments that are in this country. And one last thing is, we have not indicted only the BJP government. We've talked about all political parties across and their failures, the failures of so-called secular parties, also to stand up to this in this moment of history leaves a lot to be desired. Our complaint is about the entire political establishment and the serving bureaucracy. No one has been spared. We recognize, and with all of that, I think most of all we have to hold you and I and the viewers culpable for our passivity and silence as we have allowed our country to be changed before our eyes. We are all responsible. Let us not start pointing fingers at each other. Let us not be arrogant in our responses. Let us reflect with humility and say, where do we all need to restore the kind of India that was imagined in the Constitution. I have 2 questions from him.
No, I've run out of time, Vaibhav, and we don't have time to ask more questions, but I do want to read out some of the data that Govind's website, India Spend and Boom Life, put out today. 1 second. This is the data that was put out today, and this is about our country. And I want, in conclusion, when I thank all of my guests for being here today and having such a enlightening conversation, such a polite and respectful conversation, I want to thank all of you. But here's the data, viewers, and this is why we can't let this fire die. 4 out of 10 victims of rape in our country are children. are babies, are children. 30 to 40% of the rapes in our country happen to children below the age of 17. 43.3% of the total female rape victims in our country are minors. In 2016, out of a total of 16,863 rapes, 520 happened to babies between the ages of 0 and 5. 520 babies were raped in our country. 1,596 babies between the age of 6 and 11. And it goes on like this. Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, UP, the worst when it comes to the rapes of children. The number of child rapes in the last 5 years have doubled. And there's only 30% conviction in our courts. And I'm going to come back to the letter that has been written by these 49 retired senior, very, very senior bureaucrats, because it offers suggestions. And at a point when the entire world is looking at us for the wrong reasons, we need to be humble enough to take these suggestions and examine them. Here are the suggestions. Reach out to the families of the victims of Unnao and Kathua and ask their forgiveness. Fast-track the prosecution of the perpetrators of these cases and request a court-directed SIT. In the memory of these innocent children who have died, offer protection and reassurance to Muslims, Dalits, members of minority communities, women and children in our country. Take steps to remove from government anyone who is associated with crime and hate speeches, and call an all-party meeting to deliberate on ways in which the phenomenon of hate crime can be tackled socially, politically and administratively. It is up to the wisdom of our government to whether or not they're going to take any or all of these suggestions. But as citizens, we can take on some responsibility, because responsibility at the end of the day lies with us as voters in a democracy. You have the right to speech, to make your unhappiness or your happiness known. You have the right to vote, and that right should be exercised with full responsibility, knowing full well what we are doing when we vote. You have the right of ownership on this country and everything it does. Do not for a second believe it's somebody else's fault, somebody else's responsibility, or somebody else's problem. It is our problem, yours and mine. And the moment we forget about it and take our eyes off the ball, we will lose another baby, another child, another girl. We've already lost one too many. Thanks for watching.